On its final day, a wave of people rushed through the gates of the Ponderosa ranch as if time itself were running out. A total of 2,350 visitors entered that day, knowing it would be the last chance they would ever have to see the place that had lived in their memories for decades. They did not come quietly. They bought everything they could carry from the gift shops, clearing shelves that had once been full of souvenirs. They drank every last bottle and cup available, even the beer that usually lasted until closing time was gone before noon. Many of them cried openly at the entrance, hugging each other as if they were saying goodbye to a loved one rather than a theme park. Music played in the background, but could not hide the heavy feeling in the air. By sunset, people lingered near the gates, whispering farewell to the place that had been part of their childhood for 37 years. For more than 3 decades, the ranch had been alive with laughter, staged gunfights, wagon rides, and families exploring the world inspired by the famous TV show Bonanza. For many visitors, it was not just an attraction, but a place where memories were made across generations. Parents who had once visited as children now brought their own kids, hoping to share the same magic. That is why the morning of September 26, 2004, felt so strange. The gates opened like any normal day, yet everyone sensed that something important was ending. It was not closing because it had failed. In fact, the year 2004 had been the most successful season in its history, with around 250,000 visitors arriving. The ranch was thriving, not fading, which made the sudden closure even harder to understand. The final weekend felt almost unreal. On September 25th, the park welcomed 2,200 people, breaking its September attendance record. The next day, September 26th, even more arrived, setting the highest single-day attendance the ranch had ever seen. People wore cowboy hats, vests, and Western costumes to honor the place. Some walked slowly through the familiar paths, trying to memorize every detail before it disappeared. Others rushed to buy souvenirs, afraid that if they left empty-handed, the memories would fade too. By evening, the gift shop was completely empty. Even the smallest items, like postcards and keychains, had vanished into the hands of devoted fans. Behind the emotional farewell, a quiet business deal had already sealed the ranch's fate. Tech billionaire David Duffield had purchased the entire 570-acre property for about $55 million. Local officials had tried to raise public funds to buy the land and turn it into a protected area with hiking trails and open access for everyone. They had gathered more than $50 million and believed they were close to success. Then Duffield's private offer arrived and changed everything overnight. His purchase ended all public plans and placed the land under private ownership. Within weeks of the sale, chain-link fences surrounded the property. Warning signs appeared along the perimeter, telling people to stay out. The place that had once welcomed families from around the world suddenly became a forbidden zone. The laughter, music, and crowds disappeared, replaced by silence. Buildings that had echoed with voices for decades stood empty, exposed to weather and time. Volunteers from the Thunderbird Lodge Preservation Society rushed in as soon as the gates closed. They knew that abandoned structures could quickly be destroyed by storms, snow, and vandalism. Treating the ranch like a fragile attic filled with memories, they carefully removed anything they could save. Old wagons, mining tools, vintage cars, and Western props were carried away piece by piece. Their goal was not just to preserve objects, but to protect the history connected to them. One of their most delicate missions involved the small white wedding chapel that had stood on the property for generations. Originally built in 1871, the chapel had been moved to the ranch in the 1960s, where thousands of couples posed for photographs or even got married. Volunteers labeled each wooden plank, carefully disassembled the structure, and transported it hundreds of miles to safety. There, it was rebuilt exactly as it had been, allowing the chapel's story to continue even after the ranch itself had closed. Not everything could be saved. As months turned into years, nature slowly reclaimed the land. Pine trees spread across open spaces, weeds pushed through walkways, and snow damaged roofs that were no longer maintained. Yet traces of the past remained. If someone walked close enough to the property, they could still see faint wheel marks pressed into the dirt, the last physical reminders of the wagons that once carried excited visitors up the mountain. Among the forgotten relics were the fiberglass horses that had been favorite photo spots for families. Children used to climb onto them, pretending to be part of the Cartwright family from the television show. After the closure, these colorful figures were left behind because volunteers focused on more fragile historical items. Over time, the forest surrounded them. Pine needles covered their backs, and branches wrapped around a nearby hitching posts. What had once been cheerful attractions became silent shapes hidden in the woods, holding memories of the hundreds of thousands who had visited in the ranch's final years. Today, more than 2 decades later, the story of that last day still feels heavy to those who were there. The ranch had not faded away slowly. It had stopped almost instantly. One moment, it was alive with visitors, and the next it was sealed off from the world. The silence that followed was so sudden that it felt unreal, as if time had frozen along with the memories left behind. After the gates closed for the last time, a deep silence settled over the Ponderosa ranch, replacing the laughter and music that had filled the valley for nearly 4 decades. At the center of the property stood the famous Cartwright Ranch house, the symbol of the entire attraction and the place most visitors hurried to see first. From the outside, it looked exactly like the grand 2-story home from the television series Bonanza. But the building had always held a secret that surprised guests when they stepped inside. The house was only 1 story tall. The second floor was just a clever illusion created for the show. A staircase rose upward as if leading to bedrooms, yet it stopped at a blank ceiling. Many visitors laughed when they realized they had climbed stairs that led nowhere, but the discovery also reminded them that television magic often relied on simple tricks. Only a few rooms inside the house were real. The living room, kitchen, dining room, and Ben Cartwright's office had been built for visitors to explore, carefully designed to match the scenes millions had watched on television. The bedroom scene in the show were actually filmed hundreds of miles away in Hollywood studios. Still, the illusion felt powerful. Wooden carvings of the characters stood frozen in everyday poses, as if the family had just stepped outside for a moment. Costumes hung on racks, including Little Joe's green jacket and Haas's heavy vest, making it seem like they might return at any second. After the closure, these rooms remained untouched for years, collecting dust while the outside world slowly forgot they existed. Beyond the house, an overgrown trail led to one of the ranch's most mysterious attractions, the old mine tunnel. Families had once lined up to enter the artificial cave, where sound effects and stage collapses created the thrill of a Western adventure. After abandonment, the entrance became hidden behind weeds and fallen branches. Inside, the fiberglass tunnel stretched into darkness, its ceiling beams sagging and cracked. Scattered across the floor were fake gold nuggets made of brass, once used to excite children during the tour. Few people knew that a small fire had broken out inside the mine in 2004 due to an electrical fault. 2 visitors were injured, but the incident was quietly handled and never widely reported. Maintenance records preserved the truth, but the public remained unaware. Nearby stood the remains of the Gunny Sack Cafe, the ice cream parlor that had once been one of the busiest places on the ranch. During peak summers, it served up to 1,000 cones a day, offering relief from the mountain heat. Families gathered at picnic tables. Children compared their flavors, and teenagers in Western costumes hurried to keep up with the long lines. By the time the ranch closed, the cafe had become part of countless family traditions. After abandonment, its cheerful atmosphere disappeared. The building deteriorated under heavy snow and freezing winters, leaving only broken foundations and scattered equipment. A rusted freezer door lay twisted on the ground, a strange reminder of a place once filled with sweet smells and laughter. Thinking about the final weekend makes the silence feel even heavier. On the last day alone, 2,350 people visited, the highest attendance in the ranch's history. They lined up for food, souvenirs, and one last look at the places they loved. According to the owners, supplies ran out quickly because visitors bought everything in sight. Many believed taking home an object would help preserve the memory. The famous Bonanza Sundae, once a cheap and filling treat for families, sold out completely. Nearby, the burger restaurant that had served millions of meals over the years closed its grills for the final time. Old footage from earlier decades shows how alive the ranch used to be. Families filled the wooden streets, stagecoaches rolled by, and actors performed scripted gunfights that delighted audiences. The park had been one of the largest seasonal employers in the Lake Tahoe area, providing jobs for students and local residents. By contrast, the abandoned site felt frozen, as if time had stopped the moment the gates shut. During the final days, fans took anything they could carry: cups, signs, decorations, even display pieces from counters. Today, those items appear in private collections and museums, valued not just for their rarity, but for the memories they represent. Some pieces are displayed behind glass, preserving a small part of the ranch's story for future generations. The wedding chapel on the property carried its own remarkable journey. Originally built in the 19th century, it had been relocated to the ranch decades earlier and became one of its most beloved features. Couples traveled from far away to exchange vows there, drawn by its simple beauty and connection to the Western theme. When the ranch closed, the chapel faced an uncertain future. Eventually, it was carefully dismantled and moved once again, allowing it to continue hosting weddings in a new location. Its survival became a rare happy ending in a story filled with loss. As years passed, nature continued reclaiming the land. Pine forests spread across former gathering spaces, and weather erased many remaining structures. Yet beneath the trees, traces of the ranch still exist. Foundations hidden under soil, fragments of pathways, and faint marks left by wagon wheels. These quiet remnants hold the memory of a place that once welcomed hundreds of thousands of visitors each year. The story of what happened after the closure is not just about abandoned buildings. It is about how quickly a lively world can disappear and how memories become the only way to keep it alive. For those who once walked its streets, the ranch is not truly gone. It survives in photographs, souvenirs, and the stories people continue to tell. But for anyone standing outside the locked gates today, the silence feels permanent, as if the mountain itself decided to guard what remains of the past. One of the most emotional places inside the Ponderosa Ranch was not a building or a ride, but a quiet cemetery that stood on a ridge overlooking the property. Visitors often walked there slowly, speaking in hushed voices as if they were entering a real burial ground. White wooden crosses marked the resting places of fictional characters from the beloved television series Bonanza, and for many fans, the line between fiction and reality blurred the moment they stepped onto the hill. The graves of Ben Cartwright's three wives, Elizabeth Stoddard, Inger Borgstrom, and Marie de Marigny, stood side by side, telling the tragic backstory that shaped the family on the show. Each woman had died after giving birth to one of the Cartwright sons, a detail that made the storyline feel deeply human and sorrowful. Fans came from around the world to stand in front of those crosses. Some left flowers, others took photographs, and a few simply stood still, remembering episodes that had touched their lives. There was even a marker for Little Joe's horse, which surprised visitors who did not expect a fictional animal to be honored in such a way. The cemetery felt so authentic that many people forgot it was part of a theme park. Over time, the ranch added memorial crosses for the real actors as they passed away, turning the site into a place of tribute as well as storytelling. The first memorial added was for Dan Blocker, the gentle giant who played Haas Cartwright. After his sudden death in 1972, fans mourned deeply, and the ranch placed a cross bearing his name on the hill. Years later, markers were also added for Victor Sun Young, who portrayed Hop Sing, the Cartwright family's loyal cook, and for Lorne Greene, the actor who brought Ben Cartwright to life. When Michael Landon, known for playing Little Joe, died in 1991, his memorial joined the others. The only major cast member not represented was Adam Cartwright's actor, Pernell Roberts, who was still alive when the ranch closed. He passed away years later, long after the gates had been sealed, leaving the cemetery forever incomplete. During the final weekend in September 2004, the cemetery became one of the most crowded and emotional spots on the property. Visitors lingered there for long minutes, touching the crosses as if they were saying goodbye not only to the ranch, but to the characters who had been part of their lives for decades. Some people quietly wiped away tears, while others shared stories with strangers about how the show had influenced their childhood. Employees later said it felt less like a park closing and more like a farewell ceremony. Behind the scenes, the decision that led to this ending had already been made months earlier. In July 2004, billionaire David Duffield purchased the entire ranch property for about $55 million. Public agencies had hoped to acquire the land and preserve it as a historical site open to everyone, but his private offer ended those plans. Once the sale was complete, the future of the ranch changed instantly. The park had only a few weeks left before shutting down forever. On September 26, 2004, the gates closed without a countdown or official farewell ceremony. One moment the ranch was full of life, families riding wagons, actors performing stage scenes, children laughing, and the next it was silent. Workers did not receive advance notice, and visitors were not given time to prepare. The abruptness of the closure made it feel unreal, as if a living place had simply stopped breathing. Volunteers rushed in immediately after the shutdown, driven by a sense of urgency that felt like grief. They knew that harsh winters, vandals, and neglect could quickly destroy what remained. Wagons, mining equipment, antique vehicles, and hand-painted signs were removed piece by piece. Each object carried a story, and saving them felt like preserving fragments of a lost world. Without their efforts, much of the ranch's history might have disappeared completely. As the years passed, the silence deepened. The main house, the streets, and the attractions slowly deteriorated, while nature reclaimed open spaces. Snow piled high during winters, damaging roofs and weakening structures. Pine trees spread into areas that had once been crowded with visitors. By around 2010, many unsafe buildings were removed, leaving behind only foundations and scattered remnants. Today, faint wheel tracks in the dirt are among the few visible signs that thousands of people once traveled those paths. Standing near the ridge where the cemetery once drew crowds, it is hard to imagine the noise and emotion that filled the air during the ranch's final days. The crosses that symbolized both fictional stories and real lives have largely disappeared, but the memories connected to them remain powerful for those who experienced the place firsthand. The cemetery's story reflects the larger fate of the ranch itself. It was built to honor a television family, then became a memorial for real people, and finally faded into history when the land was sealed off. Yet in the minds of fans, the ridge still exists exactly as it was, quiet, solemn, and filled with meaning. It stands as a reminder that even places created for entertainment can become deeply personal, shaping memories that last long after the physical world has changed. After the closure of the Ponderosa Ranch, the story did not end with empty buildings and fading memories. The land itself began to change, almost as if it were reclaiming its original identity after decades of noise and crowds. When billionaire David Duffield took ownership in 2004, he made it clear that he did not intend to reopen the attraction or replace it with new construction. Instead, large portions of the 570-acre property were left untouched. Over time, forests thickened, wildlife returned, and the sounds of nature replaced the voices of tourists. What had once been a lively western town slowly transformed back into mountain wilderness. Volunteers and preservation groups continued working behind the scenes to save what they could. Organizations such as the Thunderbird Lodge Preservation Society carefully removed artifacts before harsh winters destroyed them. Stagecoaches, wagons, mining tools, vintage automobiles, and Western props were transported to secure storage. These items represented not only the theme park, but also the broader history of the American West that had inspired it. Some are later displayed in museums across Nevada and California, allowing the ranch's legacy to survive in fragments even as the original site disappeared from public view. One of the most remarkable preservation efforts involved the small white wedding chapel that had stood on the ranch grounds. Built in 1871 in Northern California, it had already been relocated once before arriving at the ranch in the 1960s. During the park's peak years, it hosted hundreds of ceremonies annually, becoming a place where real-life love stories began. After the closure, volunteers dismantled the chapel piece by piece, labeling every board and beam so it could be rebuilt exactly as it had been. It was eventually transported hundreds of miles to a new location, where it resumed hosting weddings. The survival of the chapel became a symbol of continuity, proof that even when a place disappears, its spirit can live on elsewhere. Meanwhile, the famous Cartwright Ranch house faced an uncertain fate. Preservation teams carefully numbered each log of the structure and stored them in containers, hoping that one day the building could be reconstructed. Years passed, funding remained limited, and the pieces stayed in storage, waiting for a future that had not yet arrived. By 2010, most of the remaining unsafe structures on the property had been demolished, leaving only foundations hidden beneath soil and vegetation. Visitors driving near the area today see little more than dense forest and locked gates, with no sign of the bustling attraction that once stood there. Time revealed another side of Duffield's plan for the land. Although he had closed the ranch to the public, he later donated portions of the property to conservation efforts. In 2016, he and his wife contributed a section known as the Bullwheel property to the Nevada Land Trust. This land helped connect important hiking trails and preserve scenic views around Lake Tahoe. Several years later, the donated area became part of a national forest system, ensuring long-term protection of the region's natural beauty and water quality. While some critics still questioned the closure of the ranch, others acknowledged that these conservation efforts protected the environment from large-scale development. For the Anderson family, who had built and operated the ranch for decades, the ending felt deeply personal. On the day after the gates closed, they watched as the last visitors drifted away, leaving behind empty streets and silent buildings. Employees described the experience as losing a second home. Many had worked there for years, forming friendships and routines that suddenly vanished. Fans from around the world shared memories online, signing petitions and expressing hope that the ranch might reopen someday. But as months turned into years, it became clear that the closure was permanent. Nature continued its quiet takeover. Pine needles covered pathways where crowds once walked. Branches wrapped around old hitching posts where fiberglass horses had stood for photographs. Snow and wind erased signs of human activity, leaving only faint traces visible to those who knew where to look. In some places, wheel ruts from stagecoaches remained pressed into the dirt, subtle reminders of the thousands of visitors who had traveled those routes. Today, the land exists in a strange balance between past and present. Parts of it are protected by conservation trusts, while others remain private and inaccessible. Efforts to recreate portions of the ranch in new locations have allowed younger generations to experience a small piece of its history, but the original mountain setting can never truly be replaced. The cool air, the towering pines, and the view of Lake Tahoe were all part of the magic that made the ranch feel real. The transformation of the property shows how quickly human creations can fade when nature is given time to heal. Buildings disappear, roads vanish, and even memories grow distant. Yet the story of the ranch continues to live through preserved artifacts, relocated structures, and the people who still remember what it meant to them. What was once a world of staged gunfights and family adventures has become a quiet forest, holding its secrets beneath layers of soil and snow. In that silence, the land tells its own story, not of abandonment, but of return. The mountain has taken back what was once borrowed, leaving behind only echoes of laughter carried on the wind. More than 2 decades after the gates closed at the Ponderosa Ranch, the story of the place has shifted from living memory into something that feels almost mythical. For millions of fans of Bonanza, the ranch was never just a theme park. It was a physical doorway into a television world that had once felt larger than life. Families traveled across states and even across oceans to walk the same paths as the Cartwright family, to sit in the house, to hear the staged gunfights echo across the hills. When the ranch disappeared, it felt as though part of that shared imagination vanished with it. Yet legends rarely fade completely. Instead, they settle into stories passed from one generation to the next. Historians and preservationists continue working quietly to keep the memory alive. Collections of artifacts rescued from the ranch now sit in climate-controlled storage or museum exhibits, carefully cataloged for study. Old stagecoaches, costumes, props, and signage form one of the largest preserved groups of Western television memorabilia in the region. These objects may no longer stand where they once did, but together they tell the story of a place that shaped tourism and popular culture around Lake Tahoe for nearly 40 years. Some organizations hope that one day a permanent exhibition will display these items in a way that recreates the feeling of walking through the ranch again. The relocated structures have also taken on new lives. The historic wedding chapel continues hosting ceremonies, allowing couples to become part of the ranch's legacy even though the original site remains closed. Plans to rebuild parts of the town in other locations have given fans a chance to reconnect with the world they remember. Grants from tourism agencies have supported efforts to reconstruct streets, storefronts, and exhibits using original materials whenever possible. While these recreations cannot fully replace the mountain setting, they offer a bridge between past and present. The legacy of the actors themselves remains deeply tied to the ranch's history. Dan Blocker, whose portrayal of Haas brought warmth and humor to the show, became one of the most beloved figures associated with the series. Lorne Greene embodied the strength and wisdom of Ben Cartwright, while Michael Landon captured the restless spirit of Little Joe. Their performances helped transform a television set into a cultural phenomenon that lasted long after filming ended. For many visitors, seeing the ranch was a way to honor those characters and the stories they told. Even now, reruns of the show introduce new audiences to the Cartwright family, ensuring that the connection between fiction and the real landscape of Lake Tahoe never completely disappears. Back at the original site, nature continues its slow transformation. Pine forests have grown thicker, wildlife has reclaimed open spaces, and snowfall covers the ground each winter without interruption. Only those who know the history can recognize subtle clues that something once stood there, a level clearing where a building used to be, a faint outline of a path, a few scattered stones that once formed part of a foundation. The silence is no longer eerie. It feels peaceful, as though the land has settled into a new identity. For the Anderson family and former employees, memories of the ranch remain vivid. They recall the sound of wagon wheels, the smell of food drifting through the streets, and the excitement on children's faces as they stepped into a world they had previously seen only on television. Many still speak of the final weekend as one of the most emotional moments of their lives. The crowds, the tears, the rush to hold on to souvenirs. All of it felt like saying goodbye to a place that had shaped their own stories as much as it had shaped the visitors. Fans who were there often described the experience in similar ways. Some remember crying at the gates. Others remember taking one last photograph, unsure whether they would ever return. A few kept small items, a ticket stub, a cup, a postcard, as personal reminders of the day the ranch closed. Over time, these objects have become treasured keepsakes, symbols of a shared past that cannot be recreated. The question of whether the ranch could ever return in its original form still surfaces occasionally, but most people understand that the moment has passed. The world has changed, tourism has evolved, and the land now serves a different purpose. What remains is not a physical attraction, but a story, one about how a television show inspired a real place, how that place became part of countless lives, and how it eventually faded back into the landscape from which it came. In the end, the legacy of the Ponderosa Ranch is not defined by what was lost, but by what it gave to those who experienced it. It offered a sense of adventure, a connection to history, and a feeling of belonging that stayed with visitors long after they left. Even without buildings or crowds, that legacy continues to exist in memories, in preserved artifacts, and in the enduring popularity of the show that created it. The mountain stands quiet now, watching over the land where laughter once echoed. Wind moves through the trees, carrying faint sounds that might be mistaken for distant voices if you listen closely. Perhaps that is how places like this survive, not through walls and roads, but through the stories people refuse to forget. And as long as those stories are told, the spirit of the ranch will never truly disappear.